Today, we're jumping straight into a major weather event. We're talking about the tornadoes that tragically hit Missouri and Kentucky this past Friday, May 16th.
Yeah, a really significant event. And for this deep dive, we've gathered information from quite a few places: BBC, NBC News, local outlets like WAY-TV, weather.com, even the Times of India.
Right.
But we also have this fascinating document that really digs into St. Louis's history with tornadoes, and it's quite a history.
It really is. So our goal for you today is to get a handle on the immediate impact, the human cost, the sheer scale of the damage, but also, like you said, place it in context. Why St. Louis? Why does it seem to get hit like this? And then look at the response, the recovery efforts just starting. Okay, so let's start with the immediate aftermath, the human toll.
Yeah, tragically, the numbers are already significant. The initial reports are showing at least 21 deaths across both states.
21.
Yeah. 14 in Kentucky, mostly in Laurel County, which seems to have been hit very hard. And then 7 in Missouri, 5 in St. Louis County, 2 down in Scott County.
And that number might go up. Kentucky officials seemed worried about that.
They did. They mentioned they anticipated the death toll could rise as search efforts continue. And besides the fatalities, there are dozens injured.
I saw the St. Louis mayor, Kara Spencer, said at least 38 injured just in her area.
That's right. So a significant number of people directly impacted physically beyond just property loss.
Which brings us to the damage itself. What kind of scale are we talking about?
It's extensive. In St. Louis alone, the early estimates are around 5,000 buildings damaged.
5,000. Wow.
Yeah, that's everything from roofs torn off to, trees down everywhere, structural damage.
And sounds like it wasn't just St. Louis that saw that level of destruction.
No, definitely not. Reports described Laurel County, Kentucky as being pummeled. And in Scott County, Missouri, they talked about multiple homes completely lost. Just gone.
Just gone. That's hard to even picture.
It is. And then there's the infrastructure impact. About 140,000 homes and businesses across both Missouri and Kentucky lost power.
That's a huge number. Makes recovery so much harder.
Absolutely. And you had the St. Louis Fire Department doing difficult house-by-house searches, which tells you how serious the situation was on the ground.
Mayor Spencer called it truly, truly horrendous and one of the worst storms, absolutely. That really paints a picture.
It does. The devastation seems immense.
So, can we pinpoint where these tornadoes actually track? What were some specific locations?
Well, the National Weather Service track indicates the St. Louis tornado touched down west of the city, near Forest Park. Let me check. Yes, west of Forest Park, around 2-3 in the afternoon, local time.
Okay, and we're hearing some specific stories from places that were hit. The Centennial Christian Church.
That sounds heartbreaking.
It really is. Part of the church collapsed during the storm. Emergency crews rescued 2 people from the debris, which is amazing. But tragically, one person, a church volunteer named Patricia Pendleton, was killed.
Oh, terrible. Just terrible. Yeah. And then there's the Harlem Tap Room.
An old place, right. Historic bar.
80 years old on the north side of St. Louis. Just decimated from the reports. But there's this detail about how some people might have been saved.
What happened there?
Apparently, a patron noticed the lights flickering, kind of sensed something was wrong, and yelled for people to get to the back of the bar.
Really?
Yeah. And they did, just before the worst hit. It sounds like that quick thinking probably saved lives, moving them away from the front where the most damage occurred.
Wow. That's incredible foresight and a terrifying moment.
It really is. Shows how community awareness can make a difference. We also saw reports from Kentucky. Levi Jackson Wilderness Road Park took a direct hit, had to close.
Okay.
And the London Corbin Airport, also in Kentucky, seems to have been damaged by a likely tornado.
And the visuals, I heard there was drone footage.
Yes, drone video shows what's being called massive tornado destruction in parts of St. Louis, just widespread damage. And there was an account from someone inside the St. Louis Art Museum.
What do they see?
They described the door suddenly flying open, huge tree branches snapping outside. Just gives you that visceral sense of the wind's power,
Yeah, absolutely. So what caused this? Meteorologically speaking, was this sort of expected for the time of year?
Well, yes and no. The area is, broadly speaking, part of what people call Tornado Alley, and May and June are peak months. So tornadoes aren't unexpected in the region this time of year.
Okay.
But this specific outbreak was fueled by a particular setup. You had a fast-moving low-pressure system coming through, and it clashed with a heat wave that was sitting off to the southwest.
Ah, that classic clash of air masses.
Exactly. That creates a lot of instability in the atmosphere, which is, the key ingredient for severe thunderstorms that can then spawn tornadoes.
And this wasn't just one or two isolated storms, right? It was a bigger system.
That's right. There were over 600 preliminary reports of severe weather, hail, high winds, and 26 potential tornadoes across 5 states.
26 potential tornadoes.
Wow. Yeah, so a significant severe weather event. And the National Weather Service was warning that the risk wasn't over, with potential for more severe weather in the southern plains and even up into New England.
This is staggering.
Yeah.
But let's pivot back to St. Louis specifically, because this history you mentioned earlier is really striking.
It is. The document we looked at calls St. Louis America's most tornado-afflicted urban area. That's quite a label.
Most afflicted. More than cities out in the classic Plains Tornado Alley.
Apparently so, at least in terms of recorded fatalities within a major city. It's had more tornado deaths than any other U.S. city. This latest event just adds to what the source called a grim tornado legacy.
Why, though? Is there a reason why a big city like St. Louis seems to be such a magnet? Usually you think of tornadoes hitting more open areas.
That's the counterintuitive part. Statistically, any given point, like a city center, has a lower chance of being hit than the vast rural areas around it. But St. Louis just seems to defy those odds repeatedly.
So it's not just bad luck.
It seems to be more than that. It's the frequency of direct hits on the urban core and also the intensity of the storms that have hit. We're talking multiple F3 and F4 strength tornadoes historically.
F4, that's devastating, right? Leveled houses.
Exactly. Well-built houses can be leveled by an F4, and St. Louis has seen storms of that caliber hit populated areas.
And it's not just a spring thing there either.
That's another layer to it. While spring is the peak, St. Louis has had significant deadly tornadoes in winter, autumn, sometimes at odd times, like early morning or late night. It makes preparedness even trickier.
The document also mentioned something really unsettling: recurring paths, like tornadoes following in the same routes.
Yes, that's one of the most disturbing patterns. Several of the really big ones, 1871, 1896, 1927, and 1959, tracked along remarkably similar paths through the city and surrounding areas.
How is that even possible?
Well, researchers think it might have something to do with the local geography, maybe the river valley, influencing wind patterns and how storm systems organize and move through the region. It's complex, but the historical data shows this eerie recurrence.
Let's talk about some of those historical events. That 1896 one, the Great Cyclone.
Yeah.
That sounds like something out of a movie.
It was apocalyptic by all accounts. May 27th, 1896, an F4 tornado. It tore through downtown St. Louis, crossed the Mississippi into East St. Louis. It's still the 3rd deadliest tornado in U.S. history.
3rd deadliest. How many people?
The official count is 255, but some historical estimates put it even higher. And it was, for a time, the costliest tornado disaster in U.S. history.
The sheer destruction must have been hard to comprehend.
Immense. Reports say it was maybe a mile wide at points. It just wiped out entire blocks, homes, churches, factories, schools. Areas like Lafayette Square were devastated. There's this one detail about the Eads Bridge, a major engineering feat back then. The tornado hit it with such force that a wooden plank, like a 2x4, was driven through an iron girder on the bridge.
A wooden plank through iron.
Yeah, just speaks to the incredible power of the winds.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And sadly, as you said, 1896 wasn't the only major one.
No, unfortunately not. There was an F3 back in 1871 that killed 9 people. Another in 1890, 4 deaths. Then a really bad one, an F3 in September 1927 that killed between 72 and 79 people, became the 2nd costliest tornado.
79 people.
Yeah. And then February 10th, 1959, another F4, following a similar path again, killed 21 people.
It's just one after another. A truly sobering history.
It really is. And it didn't stop in 1959. More recently, April 2011, there was that strong EF4 that hit Lambert Airport and caused huge damage, though thankfully no fatalities that time.
I remember that one.
Then an EF3 in May 2013 caused injuries, and just back in December 2021, there were 2 tornadoes actually that killed 7 people, so even winter isn't safe.
Which brings us right back to this latest one, May 16th, 2025. They're assessing it as at least an EF3.
That's the preliminary assessment, yes. EF3 means winds likely between 136 and 165 miles per hour, causing severe damage. And this one apparently formed over in Clayton and moved through several city neighborhoods.
Right. You mentioned a survivor account.
Yes, Joan Miller, her home, a historic brick house built way back in 1912, took a heavy hit.
What did she experience?
She described how sudden it was, the noise, and then just looking up and realizing the back of her sturdy brick house was gone. She could see straight through into the alley. It just highlights how even well-built structures struggle against that kind of force.
Absolutely terrifying. So in the middle of all this devastation, what's the response been like? What are the recovery efforts looking like right now?
Well, the immediate focus was search and rescue, of course. The Missouri State Highway Patrol got involved alongside local first responders going through damaged areas. And they imposed curfews in the hardest hit parts of St. Louis pretty quickly. That was partly for safety, unstable buildings, downed power lines, but also to prevent looting, unfortunately.
Makes sense. In the hospitals, you mentioned injuries earlier.
Yeah, St. Louis Children's Hospital and Barnes Jewish Hospital reported receiving over 60 patients combined from the storm. So a significant medical response was needed.
For people whose homes were damaged or destroyed.
The Red Cross moved fast, setting up 3 shelters for displaced residents. And the United Way has already established a specific relief fund, the Arrow 5.16.25 STL Area Severe Storm Tornado Relief Fund, to collect donations for the recovery effort.
That's good to hear. What about the power situation? You said 140,000 lost power initially.
Right. Restoring power is obviously a massive job and a top priority. Crews have been working around the clock, but even into Saturday, there were still significant outages. It takes time to repair that kind of widespread damage safely.
Understandable. Authorities were also giving out safety tips, I imagine, for cleanup.
Definitely. Warning people about hazards in the debris, electrical dangers, things like that. Cleanup after a tornado is dangerous work.
I saw something interesting mentioned. The fire chief, Dennis Jenkerson, talking about using AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that caught my eye too. He mentioned they were using AI tools to help map the tornado's path more accurately, using the damage reports and other data.
How does that help?
Well, it can potentially help them quickly identify the zones with the most catastrophic damage, which allows them to prioritize search and rescue efforts and resource allocation more effectively. It's a pretty interesting application of tech in disaster response.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've seen the awful, immediate impact in Missouri and Kentucky lives. Lost, injuries, homes just shattered.
And we've placed it against this backdrop of St. Louis's really unique and frankly tragic history with powerful tornadoes hitting the city directly time and time again.
Yeah.
It underscores this vulnerability. But we also see the community response kicking in, the resilience starting to show through the recovery efforts already underway.
It really does. And it leaves you with this big question, doesn't it? Given St. Louis's history, this pattern, this almost inevitability, it feels like sometimes, and knowing this latest storm followed some of those old destructive paths.
Right.
What else can be done long term? Beyond the warning systems, which are crucial, and building codes, which help? Are there truly innovative, maybe even unconventional strategies needed for a place that seems so uniquely targeted by these storms? How do you build resilience on that level in an urban environment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There are no easy answers, but it's definitely something the city, its residents, its planners,
Yeah.
will have to keep grappling with.
Definitely something to think about.